What happens when corrupt agents choose the wrong person to intimidate? A Marine shows them the true meaning of discipline and justice. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in the small town of San Elizario, Texas, a place where the pace of life seemed slower, but beneath the surface, unspoken tensions simmered. A middle-aged woman named Elena Ramírez was driving home with her 8-year-old nephew, Miguel, after spending the afternoon fishing at a nearby lake. Elena, a serene woman with a powerful presence, was the kind of person you would notice in a room, even if she didn't say a word. Her years in the Marines had given her a disciplined demeanor, but she had long since left that life behind, choosing to focus on family and peace. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the 2-lane road, while Miguel chatted nonstop in the back seat, proudly holding a small fish they had caught. Elena smiled through the rearview mirror, her voice firm and warm as she listened to the child's excitement. The road was almost empty, except for the occasional passing truck, and Elena felt happy in this moment of simplicity. But as she passed a rusty sign marking the city limits, she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. His stomach tightened, not out of fear, but because he recognized what these lights often meant in this city. He gently pulled the car over to the side of the road, instructing Miguel to stay calm and quiet. The patrol truck of I stopped behind her, and 2 officers got out, one tall and thin, the other stocky with an arrogant air that suggested he enjoyed imposing his authority. Elena kept her hands on the steering wheel, each of her movements deliberate and visible. Years of experience had taught her how to maintain her composure in situations like this. "License and registration," barked the burly officer, his tone laden with hostility. Elena nodded and calmly reached for her wallet, handing over her identification and the car documents. "Are you in a hurry or something?" added the thin officer, circling the car like a predator, evaluating its prey. "No, sir," Elena replied evenly. "We're just going home." The burly agent squinted at Elena's identification, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "Elena Ramírez, are you sure you belong here?" Elena didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure if the officer wanted an answer or just an excuse to escalate the situation. Instead, she found the officer's gaze through the window, his expression neutral but firm. But something in the way the officers exchanged glances suggested that this stop was going to be more than routine. The burly officer handed Elena's identification to his partner, who walked back to the truck to run a check. The silence between Elena and the remaining officer was thick, broken only by the faint buzzing of the police radio. Miguel fidgeted in the back seat, his small fingers gripping the edge of his seat as he whispered, "Aunt Elena, we're in trouble." Elena slightly turned her head, keeping her hands visible. Her voice was firm. "No, Miguel, just stay quiet, okay?" The people's eyes turned to the boy. Then Elena turned around. "You have a little passenger there, huh? Where are you coming from?" "Fishing," Elena replied. Her tone, as straightforward as the officer's, was inquisitive. He didn't offer any additional details. He knew it was better not to give them more ammunition. The thin agent returned, shaking his head. "Nothing about her," he said, almost disappointedly. "Well, isn't that a surprise?" The burly cop scoffed, leaning closer to the driver's window. "The thing is, your brake light is out. Did you know?" Elena frowned, but kept her voice steady. It was working well before. "Are you sure?" The officer's mocking smile widened. "Are you questioning me?" Elena kept her gaze without blinking. "Not at all, sir. I'm just saying it was working when I checked it." The officer straightened up and knocked on the roof of the car. "Get out of the vehicle." Elena's jaw tightened, but she obeyed, slowly opening the door and stepping onto the gravel shoulder. She didn't want to escalate things, especially with Miguel watching. The officers weren't just looking for violations, they were fishing for something else, and Elena could feel it. While she was by the car, the burly officer gestured towards Miguel. "Nice boy. It would be a shame if you had to see something unpleasant." Elena's hands instinctively clenched into fists, but she relaxed them just as quickly. Her voice was low, controlled. "There's no need to involve him in this." "Oh, we will decide what needs to happen here." The thin policeman snapped, moving around. To the passenger side. She opened the door, startling Miguel. "Get out, kid." "No," Elena said firmly, stepping forward. "He's a child. He stays in the car." The two officers exchanged a glance, their smug expressions wavering for a brief moment. Elena's calm yet commanding tone took them by surprise. They weren't dealing with someone who would back down or panic. They were dealing with someone who understood. The air grew heavier as the officers redoubled their efforts, their power play shifting at high speed. The thin police officer slammed the passenger door shut, but not before glaring at Miguel. The boy shrank in his seat, clutching the fishing rod like a lifeline. The burly officer crossed his arms, invading Elena's personal space. "He has a problem following orders, Mrs. Ramírez. Or maybe he thinks he's smarter than us." Elena didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hands relaxed at her sides, her voice calm but firm. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to take my nephew home." The burly cop chuckled darkly. "Trouble. Oh, he's making it very clear that he doesn't understand who's in charge here." Elena took a slow breath, her mind racing through scenarios. She could feel the weight of Miguel's wide-open gaze through the window. This was no longer just about her. Miguel needed to see what strength was like, even in the face of injustice. "Let me make it easier for you," said the thin policeman, joining his partner. He leaned in close, his tone dripping with mockery. "Back away from your car, hands on the hood. Let's see if you have something you shouldn't." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, but she did as instructed, placing her hands on the sun-warmed surface of the car. Her mind went back to her training, controlling the situation, evaluating every variable, and always staying one step ahead. The pat-down began more invasive than necessary. The thin police officer smiled as he made a show of patting, down Elena's pockets, pulling out her phone and wallet and tossing them onto the hood. "You're very quiet," said the burly officer, leaning close to Elena's ear. "It's not guilt I'm smelling, is it?" Elena slightly turned her head, her voice firm. "It's restraint." The officer's mocking smile faltered for just a moment. A crack in the facade, but he quickly recovered, grabbing Elena's wallet and flipping through it. "Maureen, is that supposed to impress me?" Elena didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than words. But then the thin police officer crossed the line, opened the back door, and gestured for Miguel to get out. The child hesitated, his small body trembling as his wide eyes darted between his aunt and the officer. "Leave him alone," Elena said, brusquely, straightening up. Her tone was like a blade cutting through the officer's false bravado. The thin cop smiled, clearly enjoying the reaction. "What's up, Dora? You're not in charge here." "I am." The burly cop approached Elena, his hand hovering near his holster. "You don't want to make this worse for yourself, Marin. You're on thin ice." Elena's fists clenched at her sides. Her breathing was slow and deliberate. He wasn't afraid, but he was calculating. Years of discipline had taught her how to control her emotions, even in situations like this. But when Miguel let out a frightened sob, something inside Elena changed. A silent line had been crossed, and there would be no turning back. Elena's eyes fixed on Miguel, whose trembling lips and tear-filled eyes ignited something deep within her, a protective instinct, sharpened by years of service and a life of knowing that the world was not always fair. "Stay away from him," Elena said, her calm voice but carrying a weight that made both officers stop. There were no shouts, no bluster, just the kind of authority that comes from knowing you don't need to prove anything to anyone. The thin officer smirked derisively, though his confidence wavered. "Okay, you're going to show us your Marine Dura tricks." Elena didn't respond. Instead, she stepped forward, positioning herself directly between Miguel and the officers. Her movements were slow and deliberate, every inch calculated to de-escalate without giving ground. "Miguel, stay in the car," Elena said firmly, not taking her eyes off the police officers. The boy hesitated, but nodded, retreating into the seat and closing the door behind him. The burly officer's hand now rested openly on his holster. "You're very close to resisting, Marin. Do you want to see how far we're going to take this?" Elena tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "They've gone far enough." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that makes even the boldest man reconsider his choices. The thin officer shifted uncomfortably, looking towards his partner for guidance. Then, in a movement so quick it seemed almost effortless, Elena reached out and snatched the wallet from the hefty officer's hand, tossing it onto the hood of his car. The movement was not aggressive. It was precise, controlled, and enough to send a clear message. She was no longer playing their game. "Let me be clear," Elena said, her voice firm and calm. "I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not going to argue. But I won't let you intimidate a child to prove your authority." The burly officer's face flushed, his composure cracking. "You don't give the orders here," he barked, stepping closer. Elena didn't move, her stillness somehow more powerful than any gesture. Her eyes pierced into the officers without blinking. "You're right, I don't give orders, but I also don't take them from men who abuse their badges." The thin police officer reached for Elena's arm, clearly trying to regain control of the situation, but Elena dodged the grip with such ease that it sent the officer stumbling forward, his balance wavering. Elena didn't hit or shove, she simply moved out of the way, her actions fluid and deliberate. The burly officer raised his radio to his mouth, barking something about reinforcements, but Elena didn't seem fazed. Instead, she stood tall, her presence alone enough to command attention. But what happened next would change the course of the confrontation in a way that no one could have predicted. The voice of the burly officer crackled over the radio as he called for reinforcements, his tone a mix of anger and desperation. The tension was palpable, but Elena remained calm, her gaze steady and unyielding. Knew that the situation was spiraling out of control and the next moments would determine everything. It was then that Miguel, still inside the car, did something that neither the officers nor Elena expected. The boy, with trembling hands, reached for Elena's phone that had been thrown onto the hood earlier. He unlocked it. Elena had shown him how in case of emergencies and pressed the recording button through the gap in the window. Held the phone low, capturing everything. "Miguel," Elena said softly, her tone a warning, but it was too late. The thin police officer detected the movement and headed towards the car. "What is that kid doing?" he barked, but his voice betrayed a flash of panic. Elena stepped in the officer's path, her broad shoulders blocking the man's focus. "He's doing what you fear, making sure the truth comes to light." The burly cop's hand tensed near his holster, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the unfolding situation. "Do you think you're clever, huh? Do you think you can outsmart the system?" Elena's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not one of amusement, but of confidence. "I don't have to outsmart the system. I just have to let the system see them for who they really are." The thin policeman lunged at Elena, but his movements were careless, driven by frustration rather than skill. Elena sidestepped again, this time grabbing the man's wrist in a firm but controlled grip. She didn't twist or pull, just held the officer firmly, her voice calm. "Don't you want to do this?" The officer froze, his face twisting in humiliation. Elena released her grip, her movements measured and deliberate. "You've already lost control. Don't make it worse." Meanwhile, Miguel's phone continued recording, capturing every word, every gesture. The burly officer barked again into the radio, but this time his tone was less dominant and more frantic. He looked down the road, expecting the sound of sirens. But none came. It was just them standing on a quiet stretch of road with the truth spilling out for anyone to see. Elena took a step back, her hands raised slightly. This can end right here. No one has to get hurt. But if you keep pushing, you're going to find out that the power you think you have doesn't go as far as you think. The burly policeman's face turned even redder, his chest heaving as he struggled to regain the upper hand. But then the thin officer murmured something under his breath. "This is going to cost us our jobs." Elena caught the words, her expression softening only slightly. "It's not too late to do the right thing," she said. "They can walk away from this." But the question wasn't whether Elena could stand her ground. It was whether the officers would make the right decision or sink even deeper. The sound of distant sirens finally broke the tense silence, but the dynamic had already changed. The stocky officer's hand tensed nervously near his holster, and the thin policeman's eyes darted between Elena and the approaching lights. His confidence was crumbling piece by piece. Elena maintained her position, her expression calm but firm, each movement deliberate. She looked at Miguel, who was still holding the phone, and gave him a small nod. The child's grip relaxed slightly, but he continued recording, the quiet bravery of his actions shining in that moment. The first patrol car stopped, its flashing lights, and 2 officers got out. These weren't the type to strut around or bark orders. They were younger, their expressions cautious as they approached. One of them, a Latino officer with a firm voice, spoke first. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Elena and the 2 officers who had called for backup. The burly officer stepped forward, his voice trembling as he tried to explain. "We had a situation. This woman was resisting." Elena intervened, her voice calm but commanding, or recording. The youngest officer frowned at Miguel, who was holding up the phone. "Ma'am, do you have a recording of what happened?" he asked. Elena nodded towards Miguel. "My nephew has it. He has been recording since they started threatening him." The thin policeman's face went pale and he murmured, "This is going to ruin us." The younger officers exchanged a glance, and the Latino officer's jaw tightened. He turned towards Elena. "Ma'am, are you okay? Is the child okay?" "Are we okay?" Elena replied, her tone firm. "But this isn't the first time these 2 have done something like this, is it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. The younger officers didn't respond, but the looks on their faces said enough. This was not an isolated incident, and everyone who was there knew it. Miguel handed over the phone, and the Latino officer reviewed the recording, his expression darkening with each passing second. When he looked up, there was no hesitation in his voice. "You 2 hand over your badges." Now the burly officer's mouth opened to protest, but the thin policeman shook his head, defeat etched in his features. "Just do it," he murmured. The scene unfolded quickly after that. The corrupt police officers were handcuffed, their protests drowned out by the sound of sirens and the whispers of the bystanders who had begun to gather. Elena stood still, her arm around Miguel, watching as the system, though imperfect, took its first steps towards accountability. When the chaos calmed down, the Latino officer approached Elena. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said. "It shouldn't have happened." Elena met his gaze. "It happens too often, but it doesn't have to keep happening." The officer nodded, his expression solemn. "We will make sure the recording gets to where it needs to go." With that, Elena and Miguel were finally free to leave. But the events of that afternoon left a ripple that would reach far beyond a quiet road in Texas. As Elena drove Miguel home, the boy broke the silence. "Hey, Elena, are you mad?" Elena looked at him in the rearview mirror, her voice soft but firm. "No, Miguel, I'm proud of you for doing the right thing today." The child's small smile was enough to light up the dark path ahead. This was not just a lesson for Miguel. It was a lesson for anyone who was watching. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is quiet and steady, defending what is right, even when the world seems to be against you. If this story moved you, share it. Let it be a reminder that justice is a struggle worth undertaking and that strength is not about power, it's about doing what is right. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Stories that matter? Yeah.